When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, military analysts around the world considered it game, set, match for Russia. Moscow was apparently poised to establish complete air dominance within days. Even if the initial invasion turned sour, Russia was expected to rely on its arsenal of 1,500 combat aircraft, advanced electronic warfare systems, and what was considered one of the most formidable air defense networks on the planet to keep up the pressure. By contrast, Ukraine had fewer than 100 operational Soviet-era fighters and aging air defenses that seemed hopelessly outmatched. Fast forward to 3.5 years later, and Russia's failure to exert air supremacy over Ukrainian skies is about to become an even bigger problem. The story will reveal why Ukraine is surprisingly winning the air war. First, Ukraine's forces have received much-needed fresh recruits and machinery. And one of the saving graces of the Ukrainian Air Force, or UAF, has been the donation of F-16 aircraft from several NATO countries. With them, Ukrainian pilots have managed to crush Russian offensive operations time and time again, going so far as to create limited pockets of air control to give the rest of their forces some breathing room. One of the key missions where F-16s would prove their worth in Ukraine just came a few months after they started flying. According to some reports, in mid-December of 2024, during a massive Russian aerial assault involving 200 drones and 94 cruise missiles, a single Ukrainian F-16 pilot accomplished something that had never been done before in the 40-year history of the Fighting Falcon being in service worldwide. The pilot successfully intercepted and destroyed 6 Russian cruise missiles during one combat mission, marking a historic achievement in aerial defense operations. Armed with only 4 air-to-air missiles, 2 medium-range and 2 short-range, the pilot first used the longer-range weapons to take out the initial targets with surgical precision. But then came the truly audacious part of the mission. After expending all 4 missiles, the pilot spotted another Russian cruise missile heading directly toward Kyiv. With no missiles left and fuel running low, most pilots would have disengaged and returned to base. But this Ukrainian pilot made a different choice. He decided to engage using the aircraft's autocannon and sought out a target moving at over 400 miles per hour in the sky. Matching its altitude, he fired when the aircraft was roughly 1/3 of a mile away. The cruise missiles in question carry anywhere from 250 to 1,000 pounds of explosive material in their warheads. If one detonates while an aircraft is closing in with guns, the explosion and debris field can easily destroy the entire plane. Thus, for an autocannon engagement, something that's already extremely rare in modern aircraft dogfighting, pilots would need to come in at an angle to avoid being fragged by explosive debris. The pilot fired several precision bursts from the M61 Vulcan cannon, just as NATO instructors had taught during training simulations done over the previous 18 months before the planes were actually transported to Ukraine. A post-flight analysis revealed 2 missiles had been flying in a vertical line next to each other in a tactical stacked configuration, made to appear as a single target to defenses and reducing the chance of a successful counterattack. The pilot destroyed both with a single gun run. This was the first time in history that a Ukrainian F-16 pilot had used the aircraft's cannon against cruise missiles in actual combat, as everything prior had been limited to simulator training and considered practically infeasible in real-life scenarios. Even American officials and experienced pilots were impressed by how Ukrainian pilots could handle aircraft that they had only access to for less than 4 months by that point. So, how did Ukraine go from having an air force that was expected to be destroyed in days to dominating the skies with a handful of Western fighter jets that other nations were ready to mothball? Well, the journey began with years of desperate requests for modern fighters. When F-16s finally started arriving in August 2024, skeptics pointed out that they were older Block 10 and Block 15 variants, aircraft that had accumulated high flight hours and lacked the advanced capabilities of newer models. These weren't cutting-edge warplanes fresh off the production line. They were aircraft that NATO countries like the Netherlands, Belgium and Denmark were actively phasing out as they transitioned to 5th-generation F-35s. In short, the airplanes would either have gone to scrap metal, sit somewhere in cold storage for years or decades, be decommissioned for showcase pieces in museums, or be sold or donated to countries that lacked even that previous generation of aircraft. When NATO realized that Russia wasn't going to suddenly stop being aggressive against Ukraine and the West as a whole, the last option seemed the most logical. And even then, it took roughly 18 months since the invasion began to get actual confirmations that the aircraft would be sent to Ukraine. But these hand-me-down fighters have been transformed into something far more capable than their original specifications would suggest. Ukraine's F-16s, primarily Block 15 and Block 20 midlife update variants supplied by European allies, feature enhanced avionics such as improved mission computers and targeting pods, enabling precision strikes and integration with modern NATO standard weapons. Now, before any aircraft left for Ukraine, it had to undergo these extensive modifications that brought them closer to current NATO standards, or what an active service F-16 needed to be. These were the closest things to F-22 or F-35, but on the older platform. At the start of the war, Ukraine only had Soviet-era aircraft like old MiG-29s, Su-24s and Su-27s, leftovers from the breakup of the Soviet Union. Due to a significant economic and geopolitical crisis that rocked the nation in the following 2 decades, Ukraine didn't have the budget or the means to maintain or upgrade its own airplanes independently. This resulted in Ukraine paradoxically selling back a lot of its weapons stocks, including aircraft, back to Russia, essentially giving its would-be invaders more options. By contrast, the F-16s, even though their design is technically older than the MiG-29 or Su-27, have been steadily upgraded to outmatch emerging Russian and Chinese aviation and electronics capabilities. Take the electronics suite as the prime example of the uplift. The modifications included using the Electronic Combat Integrated Pylon System, or ECIPS, the AN/ALQ-162 jammer from Northrop Grumman, and the AN/AAR-60 missile warning system. These enhancements were specifically configured to ensure the Fighting Falcons being provided to Ukraine would be effective against evolving Russian threats in the aerial and electromagnetic spectrums. American specialists reprogrammed the threat libraries and updated the integrated pylon systems to Thermopids Plus and ECIPS Plus. These systems should ideally provide enough missile warning while being able to deploy additional flares to reduce the odds of inertial and infrared systems successfully targeting the planes. But here's where things get technically interesting. The F-16s Ukraine received aren't equipped with the latest radar systems. The AN/APG-68 Pulse Doppler radar, carried by the Vipers Ukraine is receiving, while an upgrade from the MiG-29 and Su-27 is still outclassed in detection range by Russia's best fighters. This creates a challenge when facing advanced Russian aircraft, like the Su-35. Ukrainian strategists worked around this limitation through clever integration with other systems. The setup allows the Ukrainian Air Force to use AIM-120 AMRAAM air-to-air missiles with operational ranges of around 120 miles, with Swedish long-range radar aircraft effectively compensating for the older onboard radars on the F-16s. By combining airborne early warning platforms with the F-16's weapon systems, Ukraine created a networked air defense capability that maximizes the strengths of each component while minimizing the need for the true cutting-edge and expensive tech. The weapons loadouts have also likely been heavily modified to suit counter-missile and targeted strike operations prevalent across the front. Ukrainian F-16s have been observing carrying older AIM-9 LM Sidewinders and AIM-20C variants, like the C5 or C7, rather than the more advanced AIM-9X and AIM-120D versions. While these aren't the latest missiles in American arsenals, they're still highly capable weapons that represent a massive upgrade over what Ukraine's Soviet-era fighters could employ. More importantly, F-16s with half-life upgrades can deploy a much wider range of precision-guided weapons. For ground attack, the options include HARMs, JDAMs, Zuni, and Hydra rockets, SDBs, and paveways. Ukrainian pilots are also equipped with joint helmet-mounted queuing systems, enabling efficient and intuitive release of high off-boresight missile shots, which is a capability that Soviet-era fighters simply don't possess. Finally, there's the onboard electronics and communication systems, which overhauled the previous analog designs with fully compatible digital systems. In the original press release for the aircraft before they started flying in August 2024, the F-16AM sent from Denmark, the Netherlands, and Norway had purportedly already received numerous modifications, including new advanced core and fire control computers, advanced aircraft interrogators, JHMCS, Sniper XR advanced FLIR targeting pods, NATO Link 16 data link giving shared battle space situational awareness, and glass cockpits with 3 large multi-function color displays. When you combine all of these, you get a complete operational transformation from a dedicated fighter jet into an all-purpose aircraft meant to be adaptable and used whenever and wherever possible. When comparing a Soviet-era MiG-29 to these upgraded F-16s, you're looking at the difference between analog and digital warfare. The situational awareness alone gives Ukrainian pilots an overwhelming advantage in combat. One of Ukraine's top F-16 pilots, known only by his call sign AB, also described the transformation to American military analysts. AB earned his wings flying Soviet-built MiG-29s well before Russia seized Crimea in 2014. He's personally transitioned from Soviet systems to Western fighters and seen firsthand how the F-16 has changed the war. AB described how his wing and other Ukrainian units achieved hundreds of successful air-to-air engagements, intercepting Russian cruise missiles and Iranian-designed Shahed-Gerand drones, systems that function as long-range precision-guided cruise missiles. The small fleet of F-16s he helps command has completely taken over Ukraine's air operations, flying the vast majority of combat sorties despite representing only a fraction of Ukraine's total aircraft inventory. This shift to F-16 dominance stems from brutal practicality. Ukraine's Soviet-era fleet is becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. While Ukraine continues to fly its legacy MiG-29 and Su-27 fleets, it can't keep up with the operational demands, where sorties are conducted every day to match Russia's offensives. And since the only real producer of spare parts for former Soviet aircraft is Russia itself, Ukraine has practically no avenues for maintenance beyond superficial fixes. Considering that Ukraine's former stock still outnumbers the new F-16 donations, this makes continuous Western sustainment support for its F-16 fleet all the more essential. As Soviet parts become scarce and electronics start failing due to being incompatible with newer platforms, Ukraine is slowly but steadily starting to rely solely on donated F-16s and similar aircraft from the West. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of Ukraine's F-16 operations is what Ukrainian air crews have accomplished without any of the support infrastructure that Western air forces take for granted. In the absence of formal training pipelines, established tactics, techniques and procedures, or US contractor support, Ukrainian pilots and ground crews have needed to quickly learn how to maintain, arm and employ the aircraft effectively, developing innovative new tactics to maximize the F-16's lethality and survivability. They're writing the playbook as they go, pioneering concepts that US Air Force planners have theorized about for years but never tested under actual combat conditions. Take agile combat employment, for example. It's a US Air Force concept designed to keep air operations running even when main bases come under attack. The idea is to operate from dispersed airfields, relocate frequently, and maintain sortie rates with minimal infrastructure. Ukraine's F-16 force is pioneering this technique in real time while under continuous Russian attack, frequently relocating to keep the Russians guessing, all the while maintaining operations with minimal infrastructure. Ukrainian air crews have demonstrated the practical value of agile combat employment better than any exercise or simulation ever could. The results speak for themselves. Despite constant Russian efforts to destroy their bases and aircraft, Ukraine has sustained impressive sortie rates. After nearly 4 years of Russian air and missile attacks, Ukraine has managed to keep all of its military aircraft bases intact and operational. Russian intelligence knows roughly where Ukraine operates its F-16s, but the constant movement and dispersed operations make them nearly impossible to catch on the ground. This operational security extends to the pilots themselves. The Ukrainian Air Force refuses to release names or detailed information about its F-16 pilots, understanding that Russia would immediately target them. The pilot who shot down 6 cruise missiles in one mission remains anonymous, practically a year after the operation, and is known only through his combat achievements. But flying F-16s in combat against Russia takes more than sheer aircraft performance on paper and clever tactics. AB said Russian electronic warfare capabilities are increasingly challenging, with jamming, spoofing and interference that must be overcome daily. Russia has deployed some of the world's most sophisticated electronic warfare systems, designed specifically to blind, confuse and disrupt NATO aircraft. Every sortie requires Ukrainian pilots to navigate through this electronic maze while simultaneously tracking multiple threats. The F-16's advanced radar and targeting systems help cut through Russian electronic warfare, but it's still a constant battle in the electromagnetic spectrum. AB stressed an urgent need for more effective electronic warfare systems, particularly those catered toward countermeasures. These would allow Ukraine to focus on conducting missions and hitting targets rather than evading defenses. The F-16s are also running into a bit of a missile problem. Most of the missile variants Ukrainian F-16s carry have effective ranges between 20 and 50 miles, which is roughly half the range of Russia's R-77 missiles. As such, Ukrainian pilots need to get much closer to engage than Russian aircraft do, putting themselves at greater risk. This is why Ukraine has focused on using F-16s primarily for intercepting cruise missiles and drones, rather than seeking direct air-to-air combat with Russia's most advanced fighters. Former Air Force spokesperson Yuri Ignat acknowledged that these jets are not modern enough to compete effectively with Russia's Su-35 aircraft in one-on-one air combat, with Ukraine avoiding pitting them against Su-35s one-on-one due to the risks involved. This isn't a limitation of pilot skill, it's a recognition of the technological realities when flying older F-16 variants against Russia's most modern fighters. When AB was asked what the United States could do to most increase their success, his response was to deploy Block 70 F-16s and send more missiles. The Block 70 F-16 is the cutting edge of fighting Falcon technology, using a modern ISA radar and advanced electronic warfare systems, all the while being fully compatible with the latest precision weapons. It's what Ukraine really needs to achieve true air superiority. But even without these advanced variants, Ukrainian pilots are making the older F-16s work through skill, innovation, and sheer determination. However, the impact of F-16s extends far beyond individual combat missions. Before F-16s arrived, Russian bombers could operate with relative impunity, launching cruise missiles from deep inside Russian airspace. Russian attack aircraft could support ground operations near the front lines without significant air-to-air threats. Ukraine's air defense was purely reactive, shooting down incoming missiles and drones after they'd already been launched. The F-16s are primarily being used to actively intercept Russian drones and cruise missiles, with notable successes showcasing the aircraft's potential against certain threats. However, they're also conducting offensive operations, launching precision strikes against Russian command posts, logistic hubs, and air defense systems. The F-16 can carry nearly twice the payload of a MiG-29 and deploy advanced Western munitions without requiring complex modifications. When combined with Ukraine's emerging long-range drone industry, the F-16s have significantly higher penetrative capabilities than would seem on paper. This has been key for Ukrainian air superiority. The threat the F-16s pose has forced Russia to keep its most valuable aircraft further from the front lines, which essentially prevented it from exerting air superiority. Instead, Russian Su-34 and Su-35 fighters that once dominated Ukrainian airspace now operate much more cautiously, typically being relegated to chucking medium-range glide bombs to maintain survivability and flexibility. But glide bombs are considered notoriously inaccurate, especially when pitted against any modern electronic warfare countermeasure to jam the primitive navigational system. This has disrupted Russia's military strategy. You see, Russian military doctrine posits that it has full control over its own airspace, with Russian aircraft serving vital reconnaissance and surveillance roles while being supported by long-range radar. In return, Russia's mechanized infantry gets vital air support from planes flying overhead and delivering precise strikes. But with the F-16 reaching bigger operational capabilities than expected, plus Ukraine managing to deploy long-range drones and missiles to threaten stationary radar and military installations, that aerial and home territory advantage has all but disappeared. Russian ground forces, already struggling with supply issues and deteriorating equipment, now face the constant threat of precision airstrikes. The military's logistics operations have become exponentially more dangerous and complex, showcased by massive strikes by F-16s and Mirage 2000s, which allowed Ukraine to invade the Russian region of Belgorod months after the famous Kursk incursion. And chances are Ukraine is only going to get more aircraft if the war drags on, and the West continues the same level of support. As more NATO countries transition to 5th generation F-35 Lightning II fighters, a massive inventory of F-16s is becoming available. Norway and the Netherlands have already completely retired their 4th generation fighter jets and have switched to operating F-35s as their frontline tactical fighters. Denmark appears set to be the next European country to fully transition to the F-35 stealth fighter by retiring its F-16s by the end of 2025, with many of those aircraft already sent to Ukraine. Belgium is following the same path, planning to acquire 45 F-35s and replacing its aging F-16s by 2030, with surplus F-16s set to bolster Ukraine's defense. This creates an unprecedented opportunity. The Netherlands, Denmark and Belgium are phasing out their F-16 fleets in favour of the 5th generation F-35 Lightning II, freeing up older airframes for Ukraine. As each country completes its F-35 transition, dozens more F-16s become available for transfer to Ukraine. But it's not just aircraft. These countries transitioning from F-16s to F-35s should open their warehouses for a garage sale. Almost none of these nations' F-16 parts, consumables and maintenance gear will transition over to the F-35, so Ukraine can help clear out their clutter. This includes spare engines, avionics components, weapons pylons, and thousands of other parts that NATO countries no longer need but Ukraine desperately requires. And the rest of Europe could join the party. Turkey is the world's second largest operator of F-16s after the US, with its manufacturer having the license to produce new frames domestically. Turkey has already started upgrading its existing F-16 fleet through domestic means, which includes Block 30, 40 and 50 variants. There are even talks of Turkey purchasing more brand new planes from the US in exchange for sending some of its older stock to Ukraine. The skies over Ukraine have become a proving ground for modern air warfare, where Soviet-era tactics meet Western technology, where electronic warfare determines success or failure, and where individual pilot skills can tip the balance in crucial engagements. Ukraine's F-16 pilots are writing a new chapter in military aviation history, one sortie at a time. And as more F-16s become available from NATO's F-35 transition, Ukraine's air dominance will only grow stronger. Thanks for watching. Now, to find out exactly how Ukraine has been systematically destroying Russia's air defenses and why Russian bombers are now vulnerable even thousands of miles from the front lines, check out this video. And to stay up to date with the war and all matters of global geopolitics, subscribe to The Military Show for daily videos.